We're joined by Horacio Falcao. You're an INSEAD professor and author of a new textbook called Value Negotiation, How to Finally Get the Win-Win Right. Now, when we talk about win-win, it sounds like jargon. What do you mean by it?
Well, it's what I found when I was about to write the book, and what's inspired me to write it, is that as I read lots and lots of negotiation books out there, and many very, very good books, I felt that there was an inconsistency and even a little bit of a lack of a hard definition of what does win-win really mean and what does win-lose really mean. Most people will attribute win-win and win-lose to, as you just mentioned now, a situation, or as if the situation was already predefined for you, and as you approach it, you have to do win-lose or you have to do win-win. So other people will define win-win or win-lose as an outcome. So after we've negotiated, we had a win-win deal or not, or a win-lose deal. So although those are terminologies that, yeah, okay, I can accept the fact that you will talk about an outcome as a win-win, win-lose. I cannot accept that a situation is per se win-win or win-lose. Why? Because I believe that it will help us much more if we try to look at these two terminologies, win-win, win-lose, from a perspective at the beginning of the process, meaning as a choice. I strongly believe that if you come in and you see that win-win and win-lose is a choice that you have on how to address the situation, that actually empowers us. And it reminds us as well that there's no negotiation waiting for us as the table that defines a situation as a win-lose or win-win. There's actually the way we approach a situation will impact if it will end up being win-lose or win-win.
Isn't it important, though, that when you're approaching the talks, you have a clear idea of what you're trying to get out of them?
Absolutely. No, knowing what you want to get out of it is very important. We call it negotiation understanding your interests, and therefore you should negotiate to try to satisfy those as much as possible. Now, how to satisfy them is what's going to define if you're making a choice for win-win or win-lose. So both parties will look for satisfying interests, right? Meaning both parties who choose a win-lose or win-win process. Now, someone who chooses a win-lose way of approaching a situation, and therefore a process of win-lose, normally called bargaining as well, they will probably come in with an idea closer to how can I use my power to obtain what I want? Meaning, how can I get what I want even at the expense of the other? And in doing so, they're more likely to create a win-lose situation and therefore a win-lose outcome. Someone who comes from a different perspective, a win-win perspective, they will try to look into a situation and say, how can I actually focus on value to then work that value in a way that allows me to satisfy my interests? Not necessarily thinking of power, actually the opposite. How can I actually keep power at bay, separate, so that it doesn't infiltrate into my process and then force us to go one against each other, but rather have us focus on value, whereas win-lose focuses on power, win-win will focus on good communication to develop more value so that we can actually then satisfy our interests. And that choice will then impact the way we behave, and that choice then will impact the way the others behave. So we will have a lot of control of that situation, and we'll be able to change it in nature, actually, depending on that choice of ours, win-lose or win-win.
But it could be that sometimes you're just naive in your approach to the talks.
Absolutely, absolutely. Win-win many times is considered soft, and that's a big misconception. There are actually some very good books out there that unfortunately also do not clarify that line. When you go into a win-lose or bargaining mode, that's you chose power, that there are usually two main styles around it. What sometimes people will call hard or soft. Hard is the person who will be very aggressive, right? Will be very extreme. They will do everything towards money or value for themselves. Remember, always through power, so the value will not be guaranteed, because if they find someone equally hard on the other side, they might actually destroy value. Just think about a war. However, on the other side of the bargaining end, there's also what people call the soft approach. The soft approach is someone who will always try to avoid a fight, but they will not necessarily focus on value. They will try to avoid a fight to build a long-term relationship on the hopes that they will recover the losses of the today. That's still bargaining. That's still accepting power in the negotiation. Win-win is not soft. Soft is bad because it still brings the power in. Win-win can come across as naive because some people might misidentify it or wrongly identify it as soft. However, win-win is supposed to be positive, not naive. And that's a very important distinction. You're trying to be positive because you're constantly trying to build value positive moves in the negotiation that can also benefit the other side if they work with you. And one of the reasons why we do that is exactly to eliminate resistance from the negotiation so that we don't waste energy trying to overdo one another and instead invest that energy and resources in doing something together. That's the positive side. However, if the other one has the wrong, let's say, win-lose intention and tries to take advantage of that exercise that I'm positively putting forward, I have to be able to manage that. Otherwise, I'm just naive. And that's what the book tried to balance throughout in bringing moves that are constantly positive and yet not naive, because we're always considering what is the risk of doing this move and how can I manage this risk in a way that I'm not taken advantage of.
So in effect, you have to establish trust.
Trust is an interesting element for negotiation and something it definitely makes it easier. Let me start by saying that. Trust makes negotiation easier, especially a win-win negotiation. The more I trust you, the lower I have to double check. Not that I should never double check, but the less I have to double check, the less suspicious I am, and therefore we can move faster and accomplish things better. Funny enough though, and probably counterintuitively, trust is not needed. And here needed is the key word. Trust is not needed for a win-win negotiation, because here's an interesting paradox. If I were to need trust to do win-win, and since most people, not all, but most people, more often than not, do not negotiate with people they trust already, they would never be able to bring a win-win approach forward. So that alone would already be a barrier for win-win. So let's stop that for a while. Let's see the second issue. If I were to start a negotiation with you, Stuart, what would happen? I would have to start establishing trust. However, because we don't trust each other yet, and if I needed trust for win-win, I wouldn't be able to do win-win. I would have to start by negotiating win-lose, my two main choices. As I start negotiating win-lose, what am I doing? I'm bringing power. As I bring power, I'm putting pressure on you. You probably won't appreciate that, which means you probably won't trust me. And instead of building trust, we're actually moving further away from it. So the beauty of win-win is that you don't need trust to begin with. Of course, we would like to build it, but we can even survive without it. What we actually need early on is what we call interdependence. A sense of interdependence can be established early on in one or two sentences, because as two people come together to negotiate, there's at least an implicit understanding that we can either need one another to be better off, or just we can be better off by working together. And if that can be established early on, then there is a rational logic of why we should be working together. And that can hold us together time enough to start building a win-win approach, which means I'm putting forward my best behaviors, which is then more likely to inspire trust from your side, and therefore we start moving in the right direction.
It almost sounds that you have to be neutral in this aspect, on the issue of trust.
At least to begin with. However, if I start getting positive data from you, as we behave, you start behaving in ways that shows that I can trust you, then of course I should be taking steps towards it. And even then, I would still recommend baby steps. Of course, it's all a matter of risk-reward, right? The whole of this book is asking the readers and participants and students to think in terms of negotiation moves as risk and reward. What is the reward of moving fast in trust? And what is the risk? If I'm dealing with a small deal, yeah, maybe I can move fast because it will save me time, and the risk of it going bad is not something that I worry, because the value at risk is small. If I'm dealing with something a little bigger, of course I'm going to be a little bit more careful on that move of trust, because if there's any mistake because of the excess of trust, for example, then I want to make sure that I don't risk too much of my value at stake.
Horacio Falcao, INSEAD professor and author of a new textbook called Value Negotiation. Thanks for joining us on INSEAD Knowledge.
Thank you very much, sir.